In the mid 1990s, South Africa was a nation still finding its feet after years of turmoil and change. While the country looked forward to a new chapter of freedom and democracy, a shadow was spreading across the townships and suburbs of Gauteng province. In Atteridgeville, Boksburg, and Cleveland, women began to vanish, one after another. Most were young, many were mothers, and all were simply searching for work to provide for their families. Their disappearances struck fear into entire communities. Parents warned their daughters not to go out alone, neighbors whispered about the unknown predator, and police scrambled to make sense of the growing list of missing persons. At first, the cases seemed unconnected. But behind the ordinary streets and quiet homes, a predator was at work, a man who used kindness as bait and promises as chains. What no one knew at the time was that the number of women who fell for his deception would climb into dozens, making him one of South Africa's most feared killers. This is the story of Moses Sithole, a man the press would later name the ABC Killer. A title born from the trail of terror he left across Atteridgeville, Boksburg, and Cleveland. I first shared this story when I was just starting out, but when I dug deeper into the facts of the case, I knew it deserved to be revisited with more accuracy and context. Let's dive into the facts and retrace the events step by step. South Africa in the 1990s was a country in transition. The long, brutal years of apartheid had ended, and the nation was entering a new democratic era filled with hope and uncertainty. But while the political landscape was changing, everyday life for many remained harsh. Poverty was widespread, unemployment was high, and women in particular were left vulnerable as they searched desperately for work to support their families. In townships like Atteridgeville, the industrial hub of Boksburg, and the bustling neighborhoods of Cleveland, the promise of a job often meant survival. Women would travel long distances, answer newspaper ads, or trust word of mouth leads, all in hope of finding steady income. These were mothers, sisters, and daughters, driven by necessity and weighed down by economic struggle. It was in this fragile environment that fear began to spread. Women were disappearing, quietly at first, then in alarming numbers. Rumors rippled through communities, warnings were whispered from one family to another, and entire neighborhoods were gripped by the sense that someone somewhere was hunting the most vulnerable. And at the center of it all was a man who masked the darkness within. A man who promised opportunity but delivered terror. This man was Moses Sithole, the ABC Killer. Moses Sithole was born on November 17, 1964, in Vosloorus, near Boksburg, in what was then the Transvaal province of South Africa. His father, Simon Sithole, passed away when Moses was still a child, leaving his mother, Sophie Sithole, to care for 5 young children on her own. Overwhelmed by poverty and grief, Sophie made the heart-wrenching decision to place Moses and his siblings at a police station. She instructed the children not to tell the officers that she was their mother. Moses and his siblings were placed at a children's home. What was meant to be a safe haven quickly turned into a nightmare. The children endured systematic physical and sexual abuse. Moses, in particular, suffered frequent beatings and assaults. He was too young to understand why this cruelty was directed at him, and with no one to protect him, his feelings of betrayal festered. The very institutions and adults who were supposed to protect him instead exposed him to trauma. This period left scars far deeper than the physical wounds. Moses developed a profound distrust of women, beginning with his mother, who he viewed as having abandoned him to the orphanage. Over the years, the sense of betrayal metastasized into simmering resentment. Every beating and assault reinforced in his mind the idea that women could not be trusted, that they were the root cause of his suffering. Moses spent 3 years there, enduring systematic physical and sexual abuse, which left deep psychological scars. As a teenager, Moses ran away from the orphanage, seeking refuge with his older brother, Patrick Sithole, in Vosloorus. By the time he left the orphanage, Moses was no longer just a neglected child. He was a young man carrying a reservoir of anger, humiliation, and a warped sense of control. Eventually, instability followed. His brother later moved away, and Moses even sold the house where he had been living without permission. In search of survival and independence, Moses went to work in the gold mines of Johannesburg, navigating a harsh and dangerous environment. These early experiences would shape his worldview, and they laid the foundation for the violence he would unleash years later. By his mid-teens, Moses' childhood trauma had begun to harden into deeper anger and resentment. During these formative years, Sithole's behavior began to show alarming signs. He became increasingly aggressive and domineering, especially towards women he encountered. He started experimenting with control and intimidation, testing boundaries in ways that were dangerous precursors to his later crimes. Friends and neighbors reportedly noticed his temper and his fascination with asserting power over others, but no interventions were made at the time, allowing his anger to fester. Moses Sithole was 22 years old when he committed his first recorded sexual assault in September 1987. He sexually assaulted Patricia Kumalo, a 29-year-old woman in Cleveland. She survived her ordeal, but the specific details of the day remained private, known only to her in the court records. Her survival would prove crucial nearly a decade later. By 1988, Sithole was in a relationship with a woman named Sibongile Nkosi. Within the confines of that relationship, he subjected her to abuse. While public accounts confirmed that the abuse was not sexual in nature, the specific of what she endured remained part of her private testimony, a hidden chapter of sustained control and fear. The violence soon escalated. Just weeks later, on September 28, 1988, Sithole assaulted Dorcas Kadibone Kobane. She survived, but the full, harrowing circumstances of her attack are not part of public record. A respectful silence for the survivor. The very next month, October 1988, the violence intensified. Sithole turned his attention to Sibongile's 15-year-old sister, Lindiwe Nkosi. He sexually assaulted the teenager and then strangled her to the point of unconsciousness, attempting to kill her. Miraculously, she survived. Her detailed testimony at his future trial would paint a stark picture of his lethal intent. Moses assaulted Baiswa Doris Swakamisa in February 1989. According to reports, armed with a panga, a type of machete, he lured her under the guise of offering employment, attacking her in an isolated area near Boksburg. Luckily, she managed to escape. Later that year, Swakamisa saw Sithole near her workplace, reported the crime to the police, and identified him, leading to Sithole's conviction and a 6-year sentence, of which he served 4 years. However, the aftermath of the assault and the decision to report it continued to cause her immense suffering for years. Despite her courage, Swakamisa was ostracized by her community for reporting the assault. Her own husband reportedly beat her afterwards, compounding the gender-based violence she had endured. This first confirmed assault marked a critical turning point. It was no longer just anger or aggression, it was the calculated use of fear and intimidation to dominate and harm a woman. While incarcerated, Moses Sithole met Mother Ndlovu in Pretoria Central Prison in 1993. Her nephew was serving time along Sithole, and through this connection, she was introduced to him. Sithole made immediate advances, initiating a relationship. He began corresponding with Mother Ndlovu. She agreed to a relationship and visited him regularly until he was released on parole in 1995. After his release, he moved in with Mother Ndlovu and her parents in Soshanguve in Pretoria. Outwardly, he presented himself as a respectable man, working odd jobs and creating a fake charity called Youth Against Human Abuse to appear trustworthy. In July 1994, while still with Ndlovu, Sithole committed his first confirmed murder, killing 18-year-old Maria Monene Monama. At the time, Ndlovu was 5 months pregnant with their daughter, Bridget. Sithole and Ndlovu later married in March 1995, 3 months after the birth of their daughter Bridget. For outsiders, the marriage seemed to signal stability. He worked odd jobs, attended church gatherings, and engaged with the community, a picture of a reformed man. Behind the public facade, however, Sithole's violent impulses remained buried but unresolved. Though outwardly responsible, the psychological undercurrents that drove his previous assaults persisted. His marriage to Martha, though seemingly normal, could not survive the tension, distance, and darkness that lingered within him. They had a daughter, but the marriage quickly unraveled, ending just months later in July 1995 after an argument over school keys. Lovu would later testify against Sithole at his serial murder trial, bringing their connection full circle in court. After the divorce, Moses returned to a life marked by secrecy and isolation. Yet, he continued to present an image of respectability, which would later allow him to exploit the hopes and vulnerabilities of women seeking employment. It was during this period that the first disappearances of women in Gauteng province began to unsettle the community. The local police were initially baffled, as there seemed to be no connection between the victims, and the families were left desperate for answers. Rumors spread, fear permeated the neighborhoods, and the public demanded action. South Africa's law enforcement, still grappling with the aftermath of apartheid-era challenges, lacked the specialized resources for profiling or connecting serial crimes of this nature. For months, the suburbs remained on edge, with families and communities living in fear. Unaware that the perpetrator, Moses Sithole, was carefully exploiting these gaps in policing, continuing his attacks with chilling precision. The police were under immense pressure to find the killer. The breakthrough came with the case of Amelia Rapodile. She had gone missing after telling people she was meeting a man named Moses Sithole for a job interview. On September 16, 1995, a police reservist, out hunting rabbits near the Van Dyke mine in Boksburg, stumbled upon a horrific sight. The smell of decomposition led him to a mass grave where multiple bodies had been buried. Forensic experts were called to the scene. Over the next 48 hours, they carefully excavated the bodies of 10 female victims, all in various states of decomposition. Identification of Amelia Rapodile among the victims, detectives were able to identify her and discover that she disappeared on September 7th after attending a job interview. When investigators followed this lead, they discovered a job application form linking her disappearance directly to him. Further digging revealed Sithole's prior conviction. With that, police were convinced they had finally found their prime suspect. As soon as Sithole realized police were on his tail, he vanished from his known haunts. When attempts to lure him into a trap failed, police went public with his name and details. This forced Sithole deeper into hiding while panic gripped South Africa. As media attention on the ABC killings intensified, Moses Sithole became aware of the frenzy surrounding his crimes. The newspapers were full of detailed reports, public speculation, and appeals for information. For a man like Sithole, who thrived on control and manipulation, the coverage was both a challenge to his secrecy and a stage for his ego. Feeling concerned yet drawn to the attention, Sithole made a bold move. On October 17, 1995, he contacted journalist Tamsen De Beer at the Star newspaper. This wasn't a random decision. By reaching out directly, he could assert control over the narrative, confirm his own notoriety, and manipulate authorities indirectly. During the phone call, Sithole admitted he was the ABC killer, even claiming his murders were revenge for what he considered an unjust conviction. To prove his identity and demonstrate the seriousness of his claim, he revealed the location of a body that had not yet been found, details only the killer could know. The journalist, recognizing the gravity of the information, immediately alerted the police. This contact provided law enforcement with their first concrete lead. It was through the careful handling of Sithole's communication that the authorities could set up a trap, which ultimately led to his capture. Despite being on the run, Sithole continued to call De Beer. On one call, he even gave her a number to phone him back. Police rushed to the payphone he was using, but he slipped away moments before they arrived. Sithole, aware that the net was tightening, contacted a family member, reportedly his brother-in-law, seeking help, but the relative immediately informed the police, who saw this as the perfect opportunity to set a string operation at a factory in Benoni. Every detail was planned. Officers in plain clothes, backup units nearby, and undercover officer Franz Mulovedzi ready to apprehend him. When Sithole arrived at the factory that morning, the air was tense. He stepped out of his vehicle, cautious, eyes scanning the area. Something told him that this might be a trap. Before officers could surround him, he attempted to flee, darting towards the edge of the premises. Mulovedzi gave chase, waving through crates and machinery, the echo of heavy steps mingling with the distant hum of industrial equipment. Cornered, Sithole turned violently, swinging a hatchet at the officer with frightening precision. The blade struck Mulovedzi's hand, but it wasn't enough to stop him. The officer fired his weapon, bullets hitting Sithole in the leg and stomach, knocking him off balance. Sithole crumpled to the ground, the weight of his own violence finally catching up with him. Officers rushed in, securing Sithole while he writhed in pain. He was immediately transported to a nearby hospital, where doctors treated his gunshot wounds. Once stabilized, he was transferred to a military hospital, where detectives began what would become a grueling series of interrogations. It was here, in these dark rooms under watchful eyes, that Sithole admitted to his crimes, revealing the full horror of his killing spree. He confessed to abducting, assaulting, and murdering at least 38 women and one toddler, detailing the calculated ways he lured them under the guise of work and opportunity. For the first time, the authorities could see the complete scope of the terror he had inflicted, a chilling reminder of the predators who had lived among them, hidden behind a mask of normalcy. After Moses Sithole's arrest, the story dominated South African media. Newspapers, television, and radio broadcasts reported the capture of the so-called ABC killer. His name, his methods, and the terrifying pattern of disappearances were now known to the public, creating a wave of shock and fear across the nation. The intense coverage had an immediate effect. Women who had previously stayed silent began coming forward. For the first time, law enforcement received multiple reports from individuals who had survived encounters with Sithole or had witnessed suspicious activities linked to him. The flood of new information gave the police a clearer understanding of the scale and brutality of his crimes. The authorities were able to establish that Sithole approached his victims under the guise of offering legitimate work. He presented himself as trustworthy, sometimes appearing as a helpful ordinary man. Once he gained their confidence, he would lure them to isolated areas, abandoned buildings, vacant lots, remote stretches of road, or derelict industrial sites like the Van Dyke mine, where he could act without interruption or witnesses. The attacks were methodical. He restrained his victims, sometimes using rope or cloths, and assaulted them violently. His weapons varied: knives, sticks, hammers, and in some cases, he relied on strangulation, often with their own underwear. Sithole's brutality was calculated. He often targeted the head or neck to quickly subdue his victims, ensuring minimal chance of resistance. He also threatened them with force or authority, manipulating them psychologically to maintain control. After committing the murders, he disposed of the bodies in a way that balanced visibility and concealment, enough that they could be found eventually, but far enough to delay discovery and identification. Occasionally, he dismembered victims or left them arranged in chilling ways, creating a signature that would later allow investigators to connect the killings. Sithole's crimes were not random, they reflected careful planning and strategic execution. He avoided surveillance, monitored police movements, and chose victims unlikely to be immediately missed. His public persona, a married man working odd jobs, participating in community life, and running a fake organization called Youth Against Human Abuse, maintaining a facade of normalcy while carrying out horrific acts behind closed doors. While none of the survivor identities were widely publicized at the time, Their collective statements allowed police to reconstruct his methods. They described his calm, manipulative demeanor, his sudden burst of violence, and his ability to switch from charm to aggression in moments. These statements helped understand the breadth of his operation and linked seemingly unrelated disappearances into a coherent profile. Some survivors' accounts included Patricia Kumalo. She was one of the earliest known victims of Sithole's escalating violence. Despite the fear, humiliation, and trauma that followed, Patricia found the strength to face the legal system. Years later, she testified against him during the 1996 trial, recounting her ordeal in painstaking detail. Her testimony helped establish the pattern of aggression that defined Sithole's crimes and became a cornerstone of the prosecution's case. A little over a year later, Sithole struck again. Doris, a young woman navigating life in the busy suburbs of Gauteng, became another survivor of his violence. Unlike many of his victims, Doris survived the encounter and had the courage to go to the police. She filed a report that would eventually lead to Sithole's first major prison sentence. Later, she publicly recounted her story in interviews and documentaries, offering a rare glimpse into the terror Sithole inflicted on his victims and the bravery it took to come forward. Other survivors contributed crucial insight into Sithole's method. Moses Sithole's trial began in October 1996 and quickly became one of the most notorious criminal proceedings in South Africa's history. The courtroom was tense, packed with media, family members of the victims, and law enforcement officials. The sheer scale of his crimes made the proceedings overwhelming, with evidence spanning years of terror across Gauteng province. The prosecution presented a meticulously compiled case, combining forensic evidence, witness testimonies, and Sithole's own confessions. Among the key points were a recorded interview from his jail cell in which Sithole admitted to 29 murders. Although he recanted the confession during trial, claiming coercion, the recording was compelling and provided chilling insight into his actions. Journalist testimony. Tamsen De Beer, the Star newspaper reporter who received Sithole's phone confession while he was on the run, testified. He had revealed details about one victim's body location that had not yet been public, proving his identity and connecting him to the killings. Forensic evidence. Investigators linked multiple crime scenes through DNA and other forensic traces. The pattern of abductions, assaults, and murders helped establish a consistent modus operandi. During the trial, Moses Sithole's ex-wife, Mathan Lovu, took the witness stand. Her testimony gave the court a rare glimpse into his private life and the unveiling of their marriage shortly before the killings intensified. In court, she also identified jewelry and personal items as Sithole's, evidence the prosecution claimed tied him directly to his victims. Survivor testimonies. Survivors such as Patricia and Doris provided harrowing accounts of the assaults, which were crucial in demonstrating Sithole's predatory behavior and the danger he posed to women. Their testimonies detailed the manipulation, threats, and physical violence he employed. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Sithole attempted to manipulate the proceedings. He pleaded not guilty to all charges, claiming that the police had forced him to confess. During his time in the witness box, his statements were rambling and inconsistent, at times deflecting responsibility and other times contradicting previous admissions. The prosecution, however, systematically dismantled these claims. By presenting a coherent timeline of his crimes, linking physical evidence to eyewitnesses and survivor accounts, and highlighting his prior conviction for sexual assault, they demonstrated Sithole's pattern of predation and the premeditated nature of his murders. After extensive deliberation, the court convicted Moses Sithole on 38 counts of murder and 40 counts of sexual assault. The severity of his crimes led to a sentence of 2,410 years in prison, with a 930-year non-parole period meant to reflect the magnitude of his atrocities. After sentencing, Moses Sithole was transferred to C-Max, the maximum security section of Pretoria Central Prison. The trial not only brought Sithole to justice but also revealed the terrifying extent of his crimes and the profound impact on the communities it terrorized. It marked a turning point in South Africa's approach to investigating serial crimes, particularly in improving coordination between police and community reports, while honoring the bravery of survivors whose courage helped stop him. While incarcerated, Sithole was diagnosed with both HIV and tuberculosis, conditions discovered shortly after his arrest. Ironically, he received high-quality medical treatment in prison, often described as superior to what ordinary South Africans could access at the time. Even behind bars, Sithole's manipulative behavior persisted. He reportedly studied theology and later law, attempting to use his education to challenge the prison system. He also tried to profit from his crimes, recording a video interview with another inmate to sell his story. The consequences of his infection were devastating to his family. His ex-wife, Mother Ndlovu, and their young daughter, Bridget, both contracted HIV. Unlike Sithole, they lacked access to strong treatment, and their health rapidly deteriorated. Both Mother and Bridget later died from complications related to AIDS, adding a tragic final chapter to the story of Moses Sithole. His legacy endures as a chilling reminder of how trauma, manipulation, and unchecked violence converge in one of South Africa's darkest criminal cases. He is currently incarcerated at the Maximum Security Mangaung Correction Center. The story of Moses Sithole remains one of South Africa's darkest chapters, a tale of broken trust, shattered lives, and a nation gripped by fear. While his name became infamous, it is the victims who must never be forgotten. Dozens of women, mothers, daughters, sisters, and friends lost their lives to his violence. Each of them had hopes, families, and futures stolen far too soon. Their stories remind us that behind every headline is a life cut short, and behind every case is a community left to mourn. Though Sithole will spend the rest of his life behind bars, the scars he left behind on families, communities, and survivors can never truly heal. By remembering the victims and honoring their memory, we ensure their voices are not silenced and their stories continue to outshine the darkness left behind. Thank you for watching until the end. If you found this case chilling, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss an upload. Stay safe, take care, and I'll see you in the next video.